we're doing, yes, localization, but also we're doing community building, rehabilitation of communities, and creating actually structures for local governance, maybe later for Sudan post-war.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. When Sudan's civil war erupted in April 2023, something that is both at once very common and profoundly extraordinary happened. As always happens when crisis and catastrophe strikes anywhere in the world, neighbors help neighbors. People find ways to take care of themselves and their community the best they can. And in the first few weeks of Sudan's civil war, neighborhoods mostly in and around Khartoum began to set up what they called emergency response rooms. This is a bit of a misnomer because while some emergency response rooms do provide medical assistance, others are communal kitchens or daycare centers or provide mental health. In each case, they were created by the community in response to community needs. This so-called mutual aid happens across cultures and around the world. But what is so unique about mutual aid in Sudan is that these emergency response rooms have organized themselves into a coherent network that links very local, neighborhood-led humanitarian responses to international donors. And they have done so through a homegrown system of oversight and governance that provides a revolutionary new model for humanitarianism. Joining me to discuss Sudan's emergency response rooms, how they work, and why they are such a departure from more conventional ways of doing humanitarian relief is El-Sanossi Adam. He is the External Communications Coordinator for the Localization Coordination Council of the Emergency Response Rooms. As he explains, this is the national umbrella that supports the work of over 700 emergency response rooms throughout Sudan. As you can probably tell from my commentary throughout this interview, I find this model of humanitarian aid so pioneering and potentially transformative. In Sudan, these emergency response rooms are doing peace building amidst a brutal civil war. And if this model of mutual aid with international support can be replicated elsewhere disaster strikes, it can reshape the entire humanitarian system. If you were as inspired as I was by this interview, you can support mutual aid in Sudan by going to mutualaidsudan.org and donate directly to these emergency response rooms. I'll post a link to it in the show notes of this episode as well. Now, here is my conversation with El-Sanossi Adam, the External Communications Coordinator for Sudan's emergency response rooms. So, El-Sanossi, just to kick off, can I have you explain what are the Sudan emergency response rooms and how do they work?
Yeah, so it's members from the communities in Sudan, people who remained, since the start of this war, trying to bring the community together and support the community through providing needed humanitarian assistance that other organizations don't have the access to do. So this is the first responders on the ground, agile, grassrooted, and very neutral groups on the ground that are trying to just provide needed assistance, whether it's food assistance or, needed medication or other health assistance on the ground in Sudan. We've started this the second week after the war because we do know that in Sudan, most people are actually working people. And the war, when it started, kind of stopped lots of people from actually accessing jobs, and there's no income coming in. So we started this solidarity movement whereby the first ever like communal kitchen was in Al Juref, where those who have bring whatever they have together in a school or a yard where everybody will come and join. Even if you don't have, you come and eat, and just like kind of bringing people together. And then after that, we started getting donations from diaspora community in the United States and other countries, Sudanese who wants to help and support these communal kitchens. And then from there, just kind of response started to pop out across the tri-state capital, Khartoum, Omdurman, and Bahri. And then the more of these emergency response rooms coming out, there was a need for some sort of coordination effort to bring people together. So we've created this structure where we have local representation to kind of govern the way we do things. We created a charter that governs the work we do, and we also created specialized offices that do the actual response. So the representatives are elected representatives. The specialized offices are by merit according to the interests and the background of people. You can enlist either in the communication or in the programming or in the finance or health or other services that we provide.
Can I just have you explain a little bit more about, how these so-called emergency response rooms started? You said they began 2 weeks after the outbreak of conflict in April of last year, but my understanding is they're really like a revival of pre-existing networks that existed from the pro-democracy movement as well, that has been vibrant prior to the outbreak of war in April 2023. How did these emergency response rooms start?
The name emergency response rooms during COVID and a little bit before that, there were these emergency response rooms that are helping people navigate the circumstances of COVID, what kind of information you need, what you need to do, and stuff like that. But the concept itself is not new. The concept itself is very old. The Nafir concept is rooted in the Sudanese community where people come together to support themselves.
So this Nafir concept, this is like a long-standing Sudanese cultural tradition that you're now harnessing for these new circumstances.
Absolutely. But this response started after the war. It was like a mutual aid effort. But when we're defining it, where came the name? Okay, well, we can just call them the emergency response rooms. And it's not necessary in the medical sense, but we do some of the medical support also within these emergency response rooms, but they're there to be some sort of an immediate response to the crisis and, to kind of organize the community level engagement in terms of how to respond to this crisis. We have volunteers that include professionals, technicians, community members, and activists. And yes, it was somehow lots of the old like kind of structures of the resistance. And the way we see it is actually a continuation on the revolution that started in Sudan. But because it's a very specific response, very specific circumstances that we brought people together and organized across the country from Khartoum. Then we moved after the attack on Madani, we moved to Al Jazeera, Sinnar, and now we actually operate in all states in Sudan.
And emergency response rooms, as you noted, it's something of a misnomer, right? Because it's not like a medical emergency response room. It's whatever the community needs, these response rooms will pop up to provide. And that could be like a school, right? That could be a soup kitchen or a small hospital or pretty much anything that the community gets together and decides they need. That becomes a emergency response room. Is that kind of a fair assessment of how it works?
Absolutely. It's actually a bottom up approach. Like the community, they sit down and decide what they want to do. Are they intervening in a hospital? Are they going to run an evacuation center? Are they trying to fix the electricity or the water or maybe health clinics? We have women response rooms. We have communal kitchens that bring people together to come and eat and have meals. We have children centers and women co-ops, volunteer support, alternative school programming, protection. whatever it is the community need at that moment, at that time, that's what they decide to do. And then the approach goes through the structures that we've built to kind of make sure that they get the actual support that they needed to actually achieve this response they want to do in their communities.
Do you have a sense of how many distinct emergency response rooms there are throughout Sudan today?
Right now, we have about 700 and counting. More and more response are emerging every other week, but we do enlist them under these state coordinations. Then together, we kind of respond to these emerging needs collectively.
So you have these 700 or so distinct emergency response rooms that all work together in a way through like a coordinating mechanism. By way of explanation, could you just tell me or walk me through an example of how somewhere in Sudan, in the midst of this terrible conflict, a community came together to identify a distinct need and then used like the structure of the emergency response rooms to fulfill that need? Just kind of walk me through an example of how it works.
Let's talk about, for example, Sinar. Sinar is a little bit south of Al Jazeera. It's in the southeast of the country. So with the structure has base ER, and the base ER, it's like 25 or so members of that community come together. And this is usually on a neighborhood level. Then you have a central ER, and that's usually on the locality level. Then you have the state ERs. So basically, all these small units, all these base ERs together in that locality, they have a locality coordination. Then all these localities together, they have a state level of coordination. Then all the state together, they have an LCC, which is the Localization Coordination Council. It's like a national level of coordination.
You're describing a very much like from neighborhood to city to state to national level. It starts at the neighborhood level. That's, I think, very significant and interesting. So in this example that you're giving, what did that neighborhood level base ER, you called it, request of this network?
Right. So there is a need for food. There is a need for essential medication. All right. Great. So we have forms, form 1 to 5. We call them the F system. So the need assessment form get filled by the base ER, and they say, all right, we have about 700 families in this neighborhood that are in need of meals. This is how much it costs them per day to feed all these people. We need this kind of medication. This is how much it costs to get it because it's essential for people who don't have it, blah, blah, blah. Then the 3 signatures on that form has to be filled, which is the program of that small unit, the finance, and the reporting office. So they sign, they send it to the reps of the states. A small committee will sit down to validate and then sign the form F2, which is, well, it's an approval form. We send that to a donor. The donors, either they send the money directly to the base ERs or through a local organization that actually works in the area, or an FSP, which is the financial service provider. When they receive that funding, they immediately start purchasing, keeping record of everything. They finish that funding, they have to submit an F4, which is the financial report, and then an F5, which is the narrative report. And the F5 actually has lesson learned and what could be done better, whether the money was enough, whether the intervention was enough, how many people were served, and all that, to kind of plan better for the next round of funding. So this is literally how it works.
So at some point, you need external funding for those like diabetes medicines in that neighborhood in Southeast Sudan, for food to be purchased in local markets in that neighborhood. Where are the donors right now, and who are the donors right now for this effort?
We struggle at the beginning, that's for sure. But right now we have so many different donors. Our major donors are the USAID, through partner organizations, through the SHEF, the Sudan Humanitarian Fund. But just that question is like the difference between this model, the way we're doing things, and how the traditional way of doing it It's the design. Organizations design is donor driven. An organization will come to you and say, well, we have money for protection, or we have funding for this thing or that thing. The way we do it is actually the community that they do the design, and we just help them facilitate that support, which makes sure that they're not dealing with something they don't need at this moment, at this time. Their designing is actually based on wide range of consultation on the community. And then that's where we come in and coordinate and make sure that they get the funding they need to support their communities. Like, for example, right now in Sinar, in the same area, the emergency response rooms there, they're actually purchasing entire pharmacies and then using a voucher system that you go to the pharmacy, you get the medicine you need. The medicine is already paid for. You get the medicine you need, and then you go.
Do you have a sense of how much money has been raised or spent through the emergency response rooms since they began?
Since we began, I think it's a little bit north of 3 million.
Which is a paltry sum compared to what aid agencies are demanding. That's fascinating. You're able to do so much with such little.
And we're really asking for at least 5% of allocated humanitarian aid for Sudan to come through the mutual aid. I mean, if we're doing all this with a little bit north of 3 million, imagine how much can we do with 20 million or with 50 million, right?
So as you're describing these networks of emergency response rooms and like the governance structure that you described, where there's everything from like local to state level to national coordination, I just can't help but think that in Sudan over the last year and a half, like men with guns have torn the country apart. Yet these mutual aid groups in Sudan, through the structure of the emergency response rooms, are like a counterweight to that. You're creating networks that are keeping the country together. You're doing like peace building work, even if it's through the provision of humanitarian aid. I can't help but see this connection between structures of peace that you're creating amidst a spiraling civil war.
Yeah. I mean, like the first thing when this war happened is humanitarian aid agencies, they leave these areas. I mean, life goes on, even war or not. People need to eat. People need to have basic services like water, for example. So by creating these units, yes, we're actually doing some sort of humanitarian response, which most of us really don't have that much of experience in doing humanitarian, but the way we're doing it is creating cohesion. Sudanese communities come together to explore what can they do. Everybody brings into this mutual aid and this solidarity movement what they have. If you're a teacher, what can you do to the community in this time? Bringing those people together in this kind of way is actually, we're doing, yes, localization, but also we're doing community building, rehabilitation of communities, and creating actual structures for local governance, maybe later for Sudan post-war.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, like the structures that you're creating amidst a country that's in the midst of a horrible civil war. You're creating actual like structures that one might foresee be almost pseudo government structures following the end of the civil war, or even during the civil war as it continues.
We're giving back the power to the people, that they're not helpless. They can actually, they're resilient. They can do more than be victimized and be victim of this ongoing war. They've been abandoned, so they know that they have to stand for themselves. They have to come together in solidarity to support one another and actually to tolerate one another, to accept one another, to embrace one another, to create this healthy ground for moving forward, really.
So, can I ask, and from what I'm hearing from you, you're not sort of insisting that like conventional international humanitarian aid, like the World Food Program, sort of be replaced by the emergency response rooms, but rather they're just a complement to this broader humanitarian aid system. And frankly, just from where I sit, just the volume and the scale of what, say, the World Food Program to do is much, much larger. It's irreplaceable. What do you see as the relationship between those kind of well-established, very large humanitarian agencies like the World Food Program, which does have a good track record, and the emergency response rooms?
I mean, the World Food Program is, as you said, irreplaceable. It's the largest organization ever that can actually provide and can provide at scale. There is lots of cross-cutting ways that the World Food Program could actually work and support. I mean, they have the food. They can move tons of food in all these areas. I think, like, I've been sympathizing to the issues they're facing with access and with all that. But I think it couldn't be more simpler than you have the food, we have the access, and we have the communal kitchens. Plug in into these communal kitchens, provide the food items, and then together, I think it's an easy fix and it's an easy sell to have.
I would imagine like the problem from the World Food Program's perspective, and basically most international aid getting into Sudan, is that access is the problem, right? That they're for a very long time, they were unable to cross the border from Chad into Darfur. There are huge issues getting food and other aid from Port Sudan, where the Sudanese armed forces have their capital into the country. There's all these problems. So it's like this movement of the massive aid has been the challenge. Meanwhile, you guys are behind the lines, so to speak, in the communities.
Yeah. There's other ways of supporting, and I think cross-line and cross-border access point need to be opened. But there is other way to actually support these communal kitchens in the meantime through GCTs, which is group cash transfer to these communal kitchens that they can source their own food items from whatever available in the local market. We cannot wait for all this food to move in. We have to fill the gap, and that's what the emergency response rooms are doing. We have so many different programs that we're trying to do within the emergency response rooms. Like if humanitarian organizations are given the access to actually go and support and work in the community, they can use our structures. They can work also on their own, but doing something in the meantime is better than not. We can work together. The emergency response rooms are not here to replace any effort, and I think it's complementary to the work that all these organizations are doing, just trying to help with whatever we can.
So, what do you see as next steps for the emergency response rooms throughout Sudan? Are you simply trying to raise more money to open more rooms, or what do you see as coming in the next few months for the emergency response rooms in Sudan?
When we started with a clear strategy for the response, 4 phases. The first phase was actually, narrative building and organizing this structure and strengthening the system of good governance, piloting creative ideas on how to deliver humanitarian, celebrating even the culture of volunteerism, the culture of bringing people together, the concept of nafir, the mutual aid. Right now we are on phase 3, which is trying to fine tune our systems, community accountability, combating, corruption immediately and openly. If there's any capacity building, volunteer support, and internal discussion on what are we going to be, how are we going to evolve, improve the documentation, collaboration, sharing stories and sharing information with our donors, our partners. And here we were aiming to raise about 20 million. And I think on paper we're there, but it's not on the ground yet. The phase 4, which is we're asking for 5% of aid allocated to Sudan to go through mutual aid or through the partnerships, which is about 100 million. Here we're trying to improve the data collection, monitoring, and evaluation and learning, expand to entire Sudan while remaining agile, community-based mutual aid groups, prepare for post-war peace building, trauma healing, and rebuilding Sudan, and maintaining the local parliaments, raising community awareness and participation. So what is next for us is actually, increase the recognition. We are part of this right now, the humanitarian channel. We're trying to increase advocacy and demand protection to our members on the ground, because our members are being targeted in so many different areas by both warring parties. So the protection is really important, as well as the protection of civilians. Recognize the importance of mutual aid, beyond just when access is not granted for organizations. There's a potential to do more through the emergency response rooms, recognize the need of our style. We have to stay grassrooted. We have to stay agile. We're not to be pushed to register or turned into a local organization. It's more than that. It's a solidarity movement. It needs to stay that way. We're relevant. We matter. And appreciative of all the support to all our partners, our funders, donors, everybody who believed in the mutual aid solidarity movement in Sudan. We thank you. We see you, and God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.